So we just had a very healthy discussion on one bill that seeks to mount some education reform. That was more narrowly tailored than mine. And frankly, this bill is nothing new to this committee, although some of the makeup of this committee is different. A couple of years ago, I had a bill that had the same provisions. And it was brought into another committee for cooling off, and it has since achieved room temperature. It has gotten so cold. And so it brings back the need to have this, because it has been raised in the collective consciousness that we need to reform some of our education processes. And I understand there's no perfect way to do this, and yet I think that the things articulated here are reasonable, and there's something called for by the education community. This is not a partisan issue, nor should it be, but LA Unified has now presented 2 resolutions in 3 years calling on the legislature to streamline the teacher dismissal process. This time, a terrible incident in the school district has brought more light to the problem, and of course we heard about that in the last bill, and that more narrowly focused on that type of thing. But that's not the only kind of abuse that happens to our children. SB 1059 codifies what LAUSD has requested and is the only bill to do so. So currently, it is a very cumbersome, seemingly impossible, and very expensive process to dismiss an employee who has harmed students. Locally elected school boards have little control over who's in the classroom, other than, you know, they hire them, and then there is this long, protracted process if they're not meeting the expectations, if they're putting children in danger, or for whatever. But final decisions are also made by an unelected, unaccountable panel. According to the LA Unified School District, the average dismissal is $300,000 per teacher and can take years to resolve. The LA Times reported that LA Unified spent $10 million in 1 year paying teachers who were unfit for the classroom as they were going through this process. The so-called rubber room was where they were occupying as they were being paid by taxpayers to be educating children, and they were deemed to be significantly at risk to not be in an environment with children, but to be doing pretty much nothing for the day. This expensive, tortured process in Miramonte underscore how we have put adult interests over the children's interests. The vast majority of our teachers deserve more praise than they receive. And as I've told you before, I come from a family of educators. Both my parents were educators, a couple of brothers, several in-laws. You know, we're an education family. And it's sadly, a few apples spoils the barrel. We have a few teachers that sully the reputation of those hardworking, exceptional teachers that are the bulk of our educational system. According to Education Trust, if we ensured every classroom had a decent teacher, we would virtually erase achievement gaps, separating students of color and low-income students from their more advantaged peers. Clearly, by our budget, our state budget, we are the highest contributions to education, so it is our highest funded priority. And yet when it comes to the teachers that are in the classroom, those that are in contact with our students, those that are in fact responsible for educating our kids, we drop the ball and we don't do a service either to the taxpayers or to the students who are expecting to have an education that can prepare them for the workforce or for academia. So this bill is not so much about bad teachers, but about ensuring every child has a good teacher and every classroom is safe, because it not only takes what the previous bill did, but it expands upon that to other situations where teachers are failing our children. Mayor Villaraigosa put it this way in his support letter for my bill. Quote, "It is also important that consistently ineffective teachers, after being given adequate support," that's a key element, "are removed from the classroom. We simply cannot allow unsatisfactory teachers to languish in our classrooms." California is a leader. The nation looks to California to lead. At one time, we had the most stellar educational system. We all recognize that. We hearken back to those days. So what has happened? In the area of education and education reform, sadly, we are no longer a leader. We sit back hoping that change will happen elsewhere else, but not here. We actually don't hope for the change, but we hope that it doesn't capture us. But I believe reform is inevitable. So the fact is, as legislators charged with this responsibility, are we going to embrace it? Are we going to facilitate it? or are we going to stand back and let it happen to us? In Illinois, with support from majority Democrat legislature, Democrat governor, and the Democratic mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, approved similar reforms as this bill and much more. This bill is supported by LA Unified School District Superintendent, who will be speaking shortly, LA Mayor Villaraigosa, who sent a letter of support, and Democrats for Education Reform. There is a wave of education reform sweeping the country. These issues cannot be ignored forever, nor should they. Students' needs must not be ignored forever. We must address the profoundly egregious cases like Miramonte, but we should also not ignore all the other students who are left behind in our current educational process. Please join me in supporting students by supporting this bill.